My name is Marissa Hill, 35 years old. I own a small handmade candle shop in the city. 2 weeks ago, we got married. That night was our first dinner after the wedding. A small table in an upscale restaurant with Adrian Cole sitting across from me, as charming and considerate as always. When his phone vibrated, he excused himself to step outside and take the call. He kissed my forehead gently before leaving. I was still smiling when an older woman approached the table. She didn't bother with polite greetings. It was Grace Whitford, a regular customer at my shop, and she placed a roll of cash right into my palm, then leaned down and whispered, her voice trembling, "If you still believe in the value of family, you must leave that man tonight." I froze. My heart kicked hard, and a strange kind of fear seeped in. I looked toward the door where Adrian had just disappeared. Something was wrong, but I couldn't understand how Mrs. Grace knew anything. I clutched the roll of money as if it were a warning I couldn't ignore. Have you ever received a warning so chilling it made your spine go cold? If you enjoy emotional true life stories about trust, family, and kindness, follow the channel so you don't miss the next episodes. I was still sitting there, unmoving, the roll of money heavy in my hand, everything in my head tangled together. What Mrs. Grace had said was too frightening to believe, yet the look in her eyes didn't resemble someone joking or losing her mind. I tried to steady myself, taking a deep breath. Maybe she mistook me for someone else. Maybe she misunderstood Adrian. Maybe... The thought hadn't even formed when the restaurant door opened and 2 men walked in. They didn't look like customers coming for dinner. No elegant coats, no glance at the menu, no search for a table. They stood still for a few seconds, scanning the room as if checking for something. Then both sets of eyes stopped. Right on me. A normal passing glance wouldn't have bothered me, but their eyes were different. Direct, cold, observing, completely unbothered by being obvious. I tensed my hand instinctively. The upscale restaurant that felt so peaceful moments ago suddenly grew heavy. The sound of utensils hitting plates seemed louder than usual, as if the entire space had shifted, dragging a sense of unease up my spine. I looked toward the door, hoping Adrian would return. He didn't. The 2 men began strolling toward me, not hurried, but with clear intention. They didn't speak, didn't look around anymore, only at me. Their faces were unfamiliar. In a flash, I remembered Mrs. Grace's voice. "Leave that man tonight." I pushed my chair back and stood up, my heartbeat quickening. Part of me knew I might be overthinking. The other part was screaming that something was genuinely wrong. I scanned the room for an exit. The restroom was down a small hallway toward the back. I walked quickly in that direction, trying to appear calm to avoid attention. But I knew they were watching. I could feel it. Only a few more steps to the restroom. I sped up, my chest tightening. Just as my hand touched the door handle, I glanced sideways. The 2 men had changed direction, also heading toward the hallway. One of them pulled out his phone as if signaling someone. I didn't wait another second. I opened the door and stepped inside, slamming it shut behind me. In the restroom, I was finally alone. I thought I would feel relieved, but I didn't. I stood at the sink, gripping its edge. My reflection looked noticeably pale. I didn't know what was happening, but something beneath the surface of my perfect life was starting to reveal itself. I remembered what my father used to say, "When an elder gives you a warning, don't brush it off. No one can fake trembling like that." I used to laugh at that. Now the memory tightened my chest. I locked the restroom door and stepped back, trying to calm myself. But only one thought filled my mind. If Mrs. Grace was right, what had I walked into? I stayed in the restroom for a few minutes to steady myself. I thought I just needed to wait for Adrian to come back, tell him what happened, and then we would leave. But when a soft knock came at the door, I was about to open it when a strange male voice said, "Ms. Hill, please open the door for a moment." I froze. That wasn't Adrian. I didn't answer. A few seconds later, I heard familiar footsteps behind the man. "Marissa, it's me," Adrian's voice. I exhaled and opened the door just a crack, but immediately sensed something was off. Standing beside him was the restaurant manager, the man who had been warm and courteous earlier, now stiff like someone addressing a superior. His eyes were lowered, his voice oddly respectful. "She's in here, Mr. Cole." Mr. Cole? I had never heard anyone refer to Adrian that way. Adrian placed his hand on the door and gently pushed, forcing me to open it wider. His gaze softened, but carried a layer of control that made me uneasy. "What were you doing running in here?" he asked with a thin smile. "You're making everyone worried." "I just didn't feel safe," I said. "There were two men." He cut me off immediately, not letting me finish. "You're losing your composure again. You always get like this when you're tired, don't you?" I stared at him. I had never heard him speak like that. Dry, cold, without the slightest empathy. The restaurant manager stood next to him, not moving away from the door. He spoke quietly but loud enough for me to hear. "If you need a private room to calm your wife, we can prepare one." A chill ran through me. "I'm fine. I just need to go outside," I said, pushing the door. But Adrian was faster. He held the handle firmly, calm yet unwavering. "Stay in here for a moment. I don't want you causing more misunderstandings." I stepped back. "Adrian, what are you doing?" He didn't answer, just gave a slight nod to the manager. In an instant, the restroom door was slammed shut right in front of me. Before I could react, I heard the turn of a key from the outside. Click. The lock was secured. I hit the door with my palm. "Adrian, open it! What are you doing?" Outside, his voice softened, as if trying to stay calm. "Just stay in there. Let me handle things out here. You're exhausted, Marissa. I'm only trying to do what's best for you." I listened. The footsteps of both him and the manager grew distant. I tried the handle again. It didn't budge. I ran to the small window on the wall. However, it had thick metal bars on it, making it impossible to open. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I looked around the restroom. It wasn't designed to lock someone in, but right now it felt no different from a holding cell. And for the first time, I was terrified of the man I had just married. His face earlier was nothing like the Adrian I knew. The gentleness was gone. All that remained was a look of control, calculation, as if I were a problem he needed to manage. I stood frozen in the small room, my hands shaking. Maybe Mrs. Grace wasn't wrong. I stood in the restroom trying to find a way out. Every time my hand touched the door handle, I heard that sharp click of the lock in my mind, and the feeling of being trapped grew heavier. The silence was so profound that I could hear my own heartbeat. I pressed my ear against the door. No sound from Adrian or the manager. They were gone. I tried calling one more time. "Adrian? I want to go out." No answer. The silence was more frightening than any noise. I began pacing, looking for any tiny detail that could help me escape. The window was fixed tightly. The door was locked from the outside. There was no other way out. While I was trapped in that hopeless loop, a shrill sound suddenly exploded through the room. Beep, beep, beep! The fire alarm blared through every inch of the building. Red emergency lights flashed rapidly. I jumped, nearly dropping my phone. For a few seconds, I couldn't understand what was happening until panicked shouts erupted from outside. "Smoke in the kitchen! Everybody out! Hurry, don't stay here!" Chairs scraped against the floor, dishes shattered, and frantic footsteps thundered like a wave. The chaos spilled into the hallway, slamming right into the restroom door. I pressed my hand against it. Someone ran past, hitting the door so hard it shook. Right then I realized this was my only chance. I took a deep breath, stepped back, and threw my weight against the door. The first hit only made it tremble. I clenched my jaw and did it again. The second hit was more substantial than the third. The fourth, a tiny click sounded. Whether the lock had been misaligned when the manager slammed it shut, or someone outside had accidentally nudged it, I didn't know, but I didn't stop. I gathered every ounce of strength and shoved one last time. The door burst open, nearly sending me tumbling forward. Without thinking, I ran into the hallway. Thin smoke drifted from the kitchen, guests scattering everywhere. Some people covered their mouths, others clutched small children, eyes wide with confusion. The once elegant restaurant now appeared to be a completely different place. I didn't see Adrian. I didn't see the two men from earlier either. That terrified me even more. I lowered my head and blended into the crowd, heading for the emergency exit. My heart felt like it would explode. I didn't dare look back. All I knew was that I had to move. Fast. A staff member flung the main door open, shouting, "Outside! Go straight to the street!" I pushed through the mass of bodies, the fire alarm blaring from the building's exterior system. The smoke was stronger out here, stinging my eyes. When I finally broke out through the door, the night air hit me. I stumbled down to the sidewalk, my knees barely holding me. I stopped, bracing my hands on my knees, gasping so hard I could barely make a sound. My chest burned. The cold wind crept under my collar, forcing my mind into focus. When I looked up, the restaurant's red alarm lights were flashing, and people were pouring out non-stop. But I couldn't bear to watch. I turned away, clutching my purse to my chest. I had to hide. I had to leave before Adrian found me. I hurried into the shadows of the empty street, my palms still trembling uncontrollably. In that moment, I knew for sure. Everything had gone far beyond anything I had imagined. I had just escaped something far more terrifying than any warning. I left the restaurant area and walked quickly, nearly running. I didn't dare take a taxi, and I didn't dare look back. Only when I turned onto a quiet street leading toward the old commercial district did my breathing slow slightly. My candle shop sat at the end of the row. The wooden sign above the door hung slightly crooked from the wind, still carrying the faint lavender scent I had sprayed earlier that afternoon. Just seeing this place eased half the fear in my chest. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The glass door closed behind me, shutting out the world. It was dark but quiet inside. The smell of beeswax, licorice, and the pinewood shelves nearly made me cry. This place held all the memories of my parents. I practically grew up here, beside the old candle molds and my mother's laughter. She always said, "Old people never give warnings for no reason. When they worry for you, it means something is truly worth paying attention to." Back then, I treated it like a casual piece of advice. But now, the words cut straight through me. I remembered the trembling in Mrs. Martauisau, Grace's eyes, as well as everything that had happened at the restaurant. I sat down on a chair, holding my head. There was no way this could have been all just a misunderstanding. I needed to do something. I needed to leave the city for a few days, but to do that, I needed backup money. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. My hands trembled slightly as I typed the password. The interface loaded. My savings from all those years were still there. I exhaled, feeling a small wave of relief. I selected the option to transfer all the money to an old account I rarely used, just in case someone had access to this one. I entered the code, reviewed the information, and hit confirm. I waited. The loading icon spun. Then a red notification popped up in the center of the screen. Transaction declined. Your account has been temporarily locked due to a fraud report from your legal spouse, Adrian Cole. I went numb. I tried again, this time with a smaller amount. Still rejected. I switched to the account information tab. Even the withdrawal function was disabled. Adrian had reported to the bank beforehand, which meant that while we were still sitting at dinner, he had already arranged everything. Every bit of gentleness and attentiveness was nothing more than a facade hiding the fact that he held control over my entire life. I didn't know how long I sat there. I only felt the cold spreading from my spine into my hands. I covered my face, feeling as if someone had pulled the floor out from under me. I turned on the dim light and looked around the shop. Everything was exactly the same. The glass jars for candles, the bottles of essential oils my father gave me, the table my dad once repaired for me. Everything carried the marks of family, of peaceful memories I once believed would last forever. Yet in just one evening, I had lost all faith. In the man I chose, in my own safety, even in my immediate future. I knew I couldn't stay here long. Adrian knew this was the first place I would run to. I stood up, turned off the light, and locked the door with both locks. I had to get out of here. I needed to find somewhere safer before he found me. I left the candle shop and walked toward the old apartment complex, the place where I grew up with my parents. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe I just needed to stand in that familiar hallway, hear the creak of the old wooden floors, to feel like I still belonged somewhere. The building hadn't changed much over the years. The hallway light still flickered, and the smell of old wood lingered around the stairs. I stood in front of apartment 305, took a deep breath, and slid my key into the lock. The key didn't go in. I tried again, a second time, a third. The lock had been replaced. A hollow feeling spread from my chest to my stomach. I bent down to look closely. It was definitely a new lock, still shiny with fresh metal. My heart pounded. This apartment was under my name, so how? I knocked, first gently, then harder. Is anyone in there? This is my home. After a few seconds of silence, the door opened. A woman around 50, wearing house slippers and with her hair loosely tied, looked at me through the crack. Her expression carried clear annoyance at being disturbed. "Who are you looking for?" she asked. "I'm looking for my home." I tried to stay calm. "This is the apartment I own. I've lived here since I was little." She frowned. "What are you talking about? I rent this apartment from Charlotte Cole. All the paperwork is valid. Who are you?" I stepped back. "You said, which Charlotte?" "Charlotte Cole, Deputy Director of the Housing Authority." She said it as if it were common knowledge. It felt like someone punched me in the stomach. Charlotte. Adrian's mother. I repeated the name in my head several times to ensure I wasn't mishearing it. "No, that's impossible. This apartment is in my name. I never signed anything." The woman crossed her arms. "Don't drag me into this. I have a legal lease. If you have issues, take it up with their family. I don't want trouble." I tried to explain, but neighbors started opening their doors, peeking into the hallway. I know her. A man from apartment 307 stepped out, speaking quietly but loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're Ms. Hill, right? Someone said you were unstable recently. Her husband works for the government. They said she needs supervision." I froze. "I'm completely fine. No one needs to supervise me." A young woman from downstairs shook her head, giving me a pitying look. "You're probably too stressed. They already spoke to everyone in the building. We all know." "Is she having another episode?" someone whispered. I stood in the hallway, all eyes on me as if I were causing a disturbance. I looked at the woman in front of me, the person holding the door to my own apartment. "Please, let me see the lease," I said softly, my voice trembling. "No, I'm not involved in your problems," she replied firmly. Closing the door, the lock turned from inside with a harsh click. I stood there, my hand still on the door, as if I had been cut off from my family for the second time in my life. This apartment was where my father nailed each wooden plank, where my mother taught me how to make my first candles. Now I was shut out like a stranger. I turned around. The neighbors were still watching. Someone shook their head. Someone else pulled their child inside as if I were dangerous. I swallowed hard, my lips trembling. Adrian and his mother had moved faster than I ever imagined. I remained standing in front of the door that had just closed in my face, my mind blank. The hallway felt unnervingly quiet, with only the sound of my breathing and the weight of all those stairs around me. I pushed down the tightness rising in my throat. Everything was slipping out of my control too fast. Just as I was about to turn away, the familiar sound of footsteps echoed from the far end of the hallway. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Adrian. He appeared in a crisp coat, without any sign that he had chased after me from the restaurant. He looked as if nothing had happened. He smiled, soft enough to make my skin crawl. "Marissa, you had me worried," he said, his voice eerily calm. The neighbors immediately looked at him with trusting eyes, as if his presence alone explained all the chaos they believed I had caused. I took a step back. "Why are you here?" "Because you need me," Adrian said, moving closer, still using that gentle tone people use to soothe a child. "You're not well. You ran away from the restaurant, and now you're causing trouble here. You need to see a doctor right away." I shook my head sharply. "No, you know that's not what's happening. They changed the lock on my apartment. Your mother rented it to someone else." "Marissa," Adrian cut in, his eyes carrying a quiet force. "You're confused. You're remembering things wrong. You signed the papers giving my mother permission to manage the apartment, don't you remember? You agreed to move in with me." "I never signed anything like that," I snapped. Immediately, a few neighbors lowered their heads, and others exchanged sympathetic looks, as if they were watching someone lose control of herself. "See?" Adrian turned to them, his voice low but clear. "She hasn't been well since this afternoon. I'm sorry for the disturbance. I'll take her for a checkup." A cold wave washed through my entire body. This was precisely what he wanted, to turn me into a mentally unstable woman. And worse, they believed him. Adrian stepped forward and reached for my wrist. His hand was colder and stronger than I remembered. "Come with me," he said softly, but the steel in his tone made him sound like a stranger. I jerked my hand back on instinct. "Don't touch me." He tilted his head, and for a split second his eyes changed. Cold, deep, and faintly threatening. "You don't have a choice, Marissa. You're a danger to yourself right now." Hearing that, my body reacted before my mind did. I turned and ran. I sprinted down the hallway, hearing Adrian's footsteps close behind. Several neighbors stepped back in shock. I rushed toward the stairwell, grabbed the handrail, and jumped down the first steps. "Marissa, stop!" Adrian shouted, his voice echoing louder than it had been all day. I didn't look back. I rushed down 3 flights, my heart pounding, every breath burning in my chest. All I knew was that if he caught me, I wouldn't have another chance. I reached the first floor, pushed the emergency door open, and burst into the cold night. The wind slapped my face, sharpening my senses. I kept running across the parking lot, never turning back. All I knew was that I had to get away from him, as fast as possible. I ran until my legs ached. The night grew colder than I expected. The streetlights were sparse, and there were few cars, making the entire city feel like it no longer had a place for me. I stopped in front of an old building with a dimly glowing hostel sign. I didn't dare go to a large hotel, too easy to trace. Here, no one asked questions. Pay cash, get a key. My room was on the 2nd floor. It was no bigger than a small corner of my candle shop. A metal bed, an old wooden cabinet, and a window overlooking a dark alley. But it had a door that locked from the inside. For me, that was enough. I sat on the bed, burying my face in my hands. Panic and exhaustion washed over me in one long wave, then faded into a heavy emptiness. I had no one left to call, except one person. I dialed Mrs. Grace. The phone rang longer than usual, feeding my dread. Just when I feared she wouldn't answer, her trembling voice came through. "Marissa, are you safe?" Hearing her voice broke something in me. I told her everything. The restaurant, the 2 men, being locked in the restroom, the changed apartment lock, the neighbors looking at me like I was delusional. Every sentence felt like it scraped my throat. She stayed silent for a long moment. "Marissa," she finally said, slow and steady, "Adrian did the same thing to my daughter. Exactly what you're going through." I sat upright. "What do you mean?" "Helen, my daughter," she said. She used to be a good girl working in a small design studio. She loved Adrian so much she believed everything he said. One day, she signed her apartment over to him for a renovation loan. A few weeks later, she was gone. My grip tightened around the phone. They said it was an accident? Yes, she exhaled. That's what Adrian told the police, said they were on a boat and she slipped. But all the property transfers had been completed beforehand, nothing suspicious enough to investigate further. I had no words. She continued. Charlotte handled all the paperwork. She worked in the housing authority, had connections everywhere. One signature, one stamp. Everything was legal on paper. When I wanted answers, they told me I was grieving and imagining things. Her voice cracked just slightly. I could hear the years of helplessness beneath it. You tried to warn people, I whispered. No one listened. She said it simply, but it hit me like a punch to the chest. I looked around the tiny room. Everything felt temporary, fragile, but at least no one could reach me here. I lowered my voice. Mrs. Grace, what do I do? First, don't let Adrian find you, she said firmly. You need to stay safe and then we'll figure out the rest. But you must believe this isn't in your head. It happened to my daughter, and Charlotte, she was the one behind all the documents. I held my phone tightly, clinging to her voice like a lifeline in the chaos. You'll help me, right? I asked, my voice small but desperate. Yes, I will. Her answer came instantly, without hesitation. And for the first time in this endless night, I didn't feel alone. I had just hung up when my phone buzzed again. The screen showed the name Reese Parker. She'd worked at my candle shop for nearly 3 years. Quiet, polite, always meticulous with labels and oil bottles. I hesitated, then answered. Marissa. Reese's voice trembled. Where are you? I heard what happened. I sighed. What did you hear? Adrian came to the shop, Reese said quickly. He told everyone you were mentally unstable, that you ran away. He said if anyone saw you, they should call him immediately. I closed my eyes, feeling the tension coil tighter in my chest. Adrian was creating a narrative, and worse, people were believing it. Reese, don't call him, and don't tell anyone you're talking to me. I know, she whispered. I don't believe anything he said. You're not like that. Her voice was soft but steady. It made my eyes sting. A short silence passed. Then Reese lowered her voice to barely more than a breath. Marissa, I have something for you. I think you need it. What is it? Tonight, when I was cleaning out my sister's things, I found a key. It belongs to her. She used to work as a janitor at the housing authority, where Adrian's mother works. My sister said Charlotte always kept her office locked and never let anyone in. But sometimes, when she had guests, my sister was called up to clean quickly. She said there were strange files inside, with names and addresses of many people, mostly women. I froze. Reese continued. Since my sister quit months ago, the janitorial keys were never collected. I think you should know this. You mean... I swallowed. There might be something there linked to Adrian and Charlotte. I'm not sure, Reese said honestly, but my sister also said Charlotte was extremely protective of her documents. Every time she left the office, she checked everything twice. Once, my sister accidentally moved a picture frame, and Charlotte almost replaced her. My grip tightened again. Picture frames, documents, private items. It all sounded exactly like what Mrs. Grace had described. Reese, where are you now? Behind the shop. I didn't want to stay inside in case he came back. Can you meet me? Yes, I have the key with me. Just that was enough to make me spring to my feet. In the middle of all the fear closing in on me, a tiny glimmer of light appeared. Reese, thank you. I just want you to be safe, and I want you to know you're not alone. Those words at that exact moment felt like a gentle hand pulling me back from the edge. I pulled up my coat zipper, took the crumpled map from my pocket, and chose the back route to our meeting point. The cold, bleak hostel suddenly felt a little less suffocating. For the first time in this long night, I wasn't just running to survive. I was beginning to take my first steps toward fighting back. And that key, small, cold, might be the beginning of everything. I met Reese in a dark corner behind the candle shop. She wore a hoodie with the hood pulled low. When she saw me, she immediately tugged me deeper into the shadows, as if afraid someone might see us. Here. She placed the minor key in my hand, a simple steel key, but I could see her fingers trembling. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Reese asked, her voice tight with worry. "If we get caught, they won't leave us alone." I inhaled deeply. "If we don't do this, they won't leave me alone anyway." She nodded slightly, as if she already knew I would say that. We sat on the back steps behind the shop. The streetlight cast a dim glow, just enough for us to see the building map Reese brought, an old floor plan her sister used for cleaning shifts. Reese pointed to the right corner of the building. "This is the staff entrance. At night, it's locked with an electric system, but every time janitors clock in, they disable the alarm mode for 10 minutes. The night shift starts at 12. If we wait there, the door will open." I asked, "What about cameras?" "There are 2 outside. But my sister said both blind spots are along the side of the dumpster. If we walk close to it, the cameras won't detect us." I traced the pencil-marked route on the map, a narrow, dark walkway leading to a small metal door. And inside, there's a guard patrolling the main hallway, but the administrative work area on the 3rd floor is basically empty after 11. We need to use the east stairwell. Hardly anyone goes there. I nodded. Everything sounded both reckless and possible. Reese looked at me for a long moment, then whispered, "I'm going with you. You can't get in alone." I blinked. "Reese, this is dangerous. You think I'm just going to hand you the key and watch from afar? I'm not letting you go in there alone." I pressed my lips together. I knew she meant every word. In all the years she'd worked for me. Reese never talked much, but she was always quietly helping behind the scenes. Tonight was no different. 11:45 p.m. We stood behind the large dumpsters beside the Housing Authority building. The sky was pitch black, the wind biting cold. The building towered above us, silent, with dark windows that made my skin crawl. Reese checked her watch. 5 minutes. We held our breath and watched. At exactly 11:59, a small night shift van pulled up at the staff entrance. 2 women in janitor uniforms stepped out, chatting as they swiped their cards. The door made a soft click. A green light flashed. Reese whispered, "Now." We darted from the shadows, hugging the wall to avoid the cameras. When the 2 workers stepped inside, Reese quickly jammed the tip of her shoe into the frame to keep the door from closing fully. She and I slipped in. Hearts pounding so loud I could hear mine in my ears. The metal door shut behind us, cutting us off from the outside world. Inside was a long, dimly lit hallway. The air smelled strongly of cleaning chemicals. A floor buffer rumbled in the distance. No one paid attention to us. Reese grabbed my hand and tugged. "Come on, we don't have much time." And just like that, in the middle of the night, we began creeping toward the heart of whatever secrets Adrian and his mother were hiding. Charlotte Cole's office was at the end of the 3rd floor hallway. Her nameplate gleamed on the door, spotless, without a single scratch. I took a deep breath, slid the key Reese had given me into the lock, and turned. The door opened surprisingly easily, as if nothing dangerous waited inside. The room was spacious, unnervingly tidy. Everything was perfectly arranged. Documents stacked in a straight line, pens precisely aligned in their tray, the swivel chair positioned exactly at the center of the desk. The whole room felt like a frozen moment from someone obsessed with order. We split up. Reese opened each drawer and file cabinet individually. I checked the desk compartments, the printer, and the bookshelves. But nothing seemed suspicious. Everything was clean, organized, and arranged to provoke zero doubt. "I don't see anything," Reese whispered, her voice tinged with despair. I folded my arms, scanning the room again. Everything was too perfect, and it was that perfection that told me something was wrong. After years of making candles, I'd learned to notice tiny inconsistencies. A millimeter of uneven glass, a bump in the wax mold, one minor irregularity, which I immediately noticed. And then I found it. A picture frame hung on the wall, the largest one. It was a photo of Charlotte shaking hands with the mayor. All the other frames were perfectly parallel, but this frame was slightly off, only by a few millimeters, but enough to make me pause. "Reese, come here." She hurried over. "What is it?" I placed 2 fingers along the edge of the frame and gently pulled. The picture lifted from the wall more easily than I expected. Behind it was a small steel door, a safe. Reese swallowed hard. "How do we open it?" I scanned the room again. On the corner of the desk was a brass plaque displaying the agency's history. The founding year carved in bold letters. Someone like Charlotte would take pride in that. A person obsessed with power wouldn't choose a random code. I turned the dial. 1962. A click sounded. The safe door opened, revealing a thick gray notebook with no title on the cover. I lifted it carefully. Its weight made my hands tremble. When I flipped open the first page, a chill shot down my spine. A name, an address, a date, a signature, a note. Completed. Reese covered her mouth. "Oh my God!" The second name, the third, the fourth. 8 people. All of them are missing, dead, or accidental victims. And under the section Executor, there was only one name, Adrian Cole. On the final page, I saw my own name, Marissa Hill, my parents' apartment address. Just one short note written neatly and coldly, "In progress." I had to grab the edge of the desk to keep myself upright. Reese whispered, You have to take pictures. We need to get the evidence out of here." I took out my phone and opened the camera. My hands shook, but I forced each shot to be clear. Page after page, records, signatures, official seals, all captured. Reese stood at the door, watching the hallway, her eyes fixed on the entrance. "Done," I said quietly, slipping the phone deep into the inside pocket of my coat. "Let's get out of here." Reese nodded, though worry still lingered in her eyes. We didn't know that the moment we stepped out of the office, the people we feared most were already close. Just as Reese and I stepped out of Charlotte's office, heavy, sharp footsteps echoed through the dark hallway ahead. Before we could react, 3 figures emerged from around the corner. Adrian was in front. He no longer looked polished. His face was dark, his hair disheveled, and a bandage still clung to his temple where someone had hit him earlier. His eyes locked onto mine, cold enough to make me instinctively step back. Behind him were 2 large building security guards, their faces tense. Reese froze. "Run, Mar!" She didn't even finish before one guard grabbed her arm. Reese was yanked so hard she nearly fell. "You gave her the key, didn't you?" he barked. "Tell us everything." Reese struggled. "I didn't." Adrian stepped closer, not even glancing at her. He spoke one low, threatening line. "You should tell the truth. They're not patient." I lunged forward to pull Reese away, but Adrian blocked me instantly. He stood close enough for me to see the fury in his eyes. "Marissa, you've made this worse," he said softly, but with weight. "Give me your phone." I shook my head. He grabbed my wrist so hard I cried out. His other hand lunged at my coat pocket, where my phone was, fast as a strike. "Adrian, don't..." I clutched my coat, but he was much stronger. I felt the phone slipping from my grip. He gritted his teeth and yanked again. And then a loud crack sounded. Adrian froze. His eyes widened in shock. His hand slackened. Behind him stood Grace. She held a heavy glass jar, still trembling from the blow she'd delivered. I didn't know how she found us or where she found the courage, but she had done it. "Don't touch her," Grace panted. "I won't let anyone else die." Adrian staggered, collapsing to the floor. One guard shouted, "Grab them!" Grace grabbed my arm. "Go!" We ran down the hallway. Reese twisted free from the guard and sprinted after us. My heartbeat pounded so violently it felt like my ribs would snap. Behind us, the guards' boots thundered like war drums. We reached the end of the hallway, where the janitor's storage closet was located. Grace yanked the door open and shoved me inside. "Grace, come in with me," I cried, pulling her arm, but her face was strangely calm. She shook her head. "No, they need to catch someone. So they think they found the right one." She brushed my hair back, her voice cracking. "You have to live. You have to tell the truth. You have to save the others." "No, I'm not leaving you." Grace pushed the door hard, a faint smile crossing her wrinkled face. "My daughter would be proud I'm doing the right thing this time." Then, click, the sound of a lock turning from the outside. I slammed my hands against the door. "Grace, don't do this, Mrs. Grace!" There were hurried footsteps, shouting, then the sound of Grace being seized. She didn't fight. Just before she was dragged off, her fading voice reached me through the crack. "Marissa, tomorrow. Be brave." And then, nothing. I sank to the cold concrete floor, shaking from head to toe. I knew, in that moment, I no longer had the right to give up. The phone in my pocket, the evidence, was still there. Grace had traded her freedom, so I could make it to the light. I didn't know when I fell asleep in the storage room. I only remembered waking to faint light slipping through the door crack. People outside were talking. Early morning staff. I held my breath, pressing my ear to the door. No guards. No one is watching. I tapped lightly on the door. After a moment, a janitor approached, grumbling. "Why does this door keep sticking?" As soon as I heard the key turning, I stepped to the side, pretending I'd simply been stuck because of a broken lock. When the door opened, I bowed my head in a quick thank you and slipped past before she could see my face. The hallway was busy now. I clutched my phone to my chest and walked straight toward the main exit like an employee running late. And then I stepped outside. Cold wind hit my face, but it was the first breath of freedom I'd had since last night. I found a small copy shop a few blocks away. With the bit of cash I had left, I printed every photo from my phone. Names, addresses, dates, signatures. Every detail from the gray ledger. Each printed page made the weight on my shoulders heavier and clearer. Then I called Mrs. Grace's son. When he heard my voice and learned his mother had been taken, he went silent for a long time. Then he spoke a single line. "Tell me where you are. I'm coming." I called a few other families Mrs. Grace had mentioned. When I read the names of their loved ones, every one of them fell silent. Not one doubted me. Their voices all shared the same tone, grief and determination. By noon, the city center was busier than usual. The entire Civic Hall was draped with a massive banner honoring Deputy Director of the Housing Authority, Charlotte Cole. I stood at the entrance, clutching the stack of documents. I didn't know if my hands were shaking, only that my legs refused to step back. Below is the American English translation, accurate, complete, and without additions. When the congratulatory music played, Charlotte walked onto the stage. She wore a light-colored suit, her face bright as someone receiving a significant award. Seeing her smile made my throat go completely dry. I walked straight down the center aisle. As a security guard approached, I spoke loudly. "I have evidence related to the person being honored today." The whole hall turned to look at me. Charlotte stood on stage. Her smile vanished for a few seconds, then she tried to regain her composure. "Someone escort this woman out," she said in a soft voice that nevertheless carried a threat. I raised the stack of papers. 12 months ago, the father of someone here disappeared. Note in the ledger, completed. A man in the front row slowly stood up. His face was hollow. That was my father. His voice broke. "His name is on that list. I've suspected for years." Murmurs began to spread through the auditorium. Several cameras swung to point at me immediately. I opened the next page. Victim 2, traffic accident, property transferred to a relative of Charlotte. A young woman jumped to her feet. "That was my sister. I knew something was wrong." Then, one by one, people stood. Those who had lost fathers, those who had lost sisters, those who had lost mothers. They held up photos of their loved ones. The press flashes popped continuously. The hall, once quiet, filled with choked sobs and callers saying the names of the dead. I opened the final page. The next name on the list is mine. Note, in progress. The entire hall froze. I continued, my voice firmer. I am alive because a brave old woman saved me last night, and she is being detained for daring to oppose them. I looked straight at the stage. Charlotte's eyes had lost their confidence. Something trembled under the surface of her composure. At that moment, I knew. The truth was beginning to peel away. The whole hall erupted into chaos. The clamor, chairs scraping, the press's rapid questions, all blended into a heavy roar like waves. I still stood in the aisle, clutching the stack of documents. A police officer near the stage hurried forward, his face stern. "May I see those, please?" He spoke calmly, but I could see tension in his eyes. I handed him the papers. He flipped through them quickly. His eyes widened with each page. It was no longer just suspicion. He realized this was a serious matter. He turned to his colleague. "Call for backup. Seal the area." Meanwhile, Charlotte stood on the stage, still holding the microphone but now unable to speak. She looked down at the audience where the gazes had changed. No longer respect, but anger, disappointment, and even revulsion. She tried to leave the stage, but two other officers stepped forward to block her. "Charlotte Cole," one officer said clearly, "we are detaining you for investigation related to suspicious deaths and disappearances. Please put your hands out." "Nell, no, this is fabricated." Charlotte yanked her arm away, but her voice noticeably trembled. "She is mentally unstable. You must believe me." The sound of handcuffs snapping shut was definitive. She was turned around and her hands secured behind her back. A hush ran through the crowd, as if people could not believe what they were witnessing. In the lower rows, Adrian sprang to his feet. His face went pale. "Charlotte, Mother, they have no right." Two more officers moved in quickly. One placed a hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Adrian Cole, we need your cooperation. Please come with us for questioning." He tried to back away, then looked at me. That look no longer hid anything. No warmth, no tenderness, only hatred and collapse. "Marissa, you will pay for this." His voice was low and strained, yet it trembled with emotion. "No," I replied, my voice calmer than I felt. "You and your mother will pay for the people you've harmed." The officers took hold of Adrian's hands and cuffed him. He struggled but was unable to break free. A news camera swung in to capture him being led away. Shouts rose from the audience. "Justice for the dead! Reinvestigate everything! Don't let them escape!" No one stood with them anymore. Charlotte bowed her head, her face ashen as she was led down from the stage. Adrian was escorted behind her, head down, his steps faltering as if he had lost all composure. I stood there watching the two people I had thought of as family months ago. Everything moved faster than I'd imagined, and yet the weight of it was heavier than I'd ever expected. Amid the shouts, the officers' footsteps, and the flashing cameras, one thing hit me clearly. No one believed them anymore. No one was protecting them anymore. At last, the truth had won, and Grace. Surely she would have heard this somewhere. A few weeks later, everything gradually became clear. Files were reopened, the victims' families were assisted with paperwork, Grace was released and became a key witness in the case. I also regained my apartment after investigators concluded that all transfer documents connected to Charlotte showed signs of fraud. The day I stepped back into apartment 305, the replacement lock had been changed back to mine. It felt like returning to the place where I had been cruelly pushed out. But this time, I stood in that place with a completely different stance. The apartment still smelled of old wood and the familiar warmth of a bygone era. I cleaned every corner, wiped down the dining table my father had made when I was small, and set aside a small space near the window as a memorial table. I placed photos of my parents there beside a small picture of Helen, Grace's only daughter. I lit a licorice-scented candle. The flame burned steadily, warm and comforting like a familiar breath in this home. That afternoon, Reese arrived with Grace's son. They brought some food and a few small bouquets. Grace moved slowly, but her face was much brighter than on that terrible night. When she saw the small shrine, she paused for a long time. "I didn't expect my girl would ever be placed beside people as good as these," she said, her voice low but peaceful. I squeezed her hand gently. "If not for you, I wouldn't be standing here. Helen saved me too, in her own way." Reese cleared the cups, and Grace's son pulled up a small chair. The once quiet apartment was filled with soft conversation. No one spoke of grief so much anymore. What remained was a sense of gratitude for having survived. I relit the candle, watching the flame tilt gently in the afternoon breeze. "Family isn't just blood," I said quietly. "Sometimes it's strangers in their later years who hand you the light to escape the dark." Grace smiled, a very kind smile. Reese placed her hand on my shoulder and squeezed gently. In that moment, I understood that family is sometimes built not from lineage, but from people brave enough to hold your hand when the world turns its back. When people were prepared to leave, I stood in the small room and looked back at the journey. Each event had taken something from me, but in return, I found more important things: truth, justice, and those who stood with me despite no tie at all. I stepped out onto the balcony, looked down at the familiar street, and spoke softly like a promise. If you enjoy real-life stories, lessons about trust, family, and simple kindness, follow the channel to walk with me through more warm stories ahead. A small, sincere reminder, just enough to close everything. The story ends here. The candle on the table still burned, calm, like the place I belong.